So thank you everyone for joining today's workshop, Working Together Towards Common Goals, Evaluation, Learning, and Impact. Really appreciate your time today in joining us. Looking forward to the conversations and exploring this topic together. So my name is Jennifer Russell. I'm the VP of Grants and Program at Adirondack Foundation. And just as an intro to why we're doing this and who's here. So the foundation has been working with the Philanthropic Initiative, or TPI, over the past few months to really increase our capacity for evaluation and for showcasing impact. And as part of that work that the foundation has taken on, we decided to work with TPI and develop some training and resources to help us all strengthen our ability to define and measure our outcomes and to build or refine evaluation plans and share practice together. So I'm really happy to introduce our facilitator for today, Lacey Upton from TPI. She's going to be leading this work in the training.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. As Jen shared, I'm Lacey Upton. I'm with the Philanthropic Initiative. I'm one of the partners here. So I'm very excited to spend some time with you all today and think about some big questions around evaluation and impact, and how we can work together to all strengthen skills. As Jen shared, the Philanthropic Initiative, we're a nonprofit philanthropy consulting group. So we work with foundations and donors all over the country. And then you all know the Adirondack Foundation very well, but just a little bit about them here as well to sort of ground us as we get started. So our goals for today are really to explore how evaluation can help to strengthen your organization's learning and your impact story, develop and use logic models to map out activities, outputs, and outcomes, as well as make connections, learn from one another. As Jen shared, we're going to be spending some time in breakout rooms. So there will be some, participation and a little bit of interaction. We really hope to, I know many of you probably already have relationships with each other, but hopefully we can strengthen those even more and the sense of community that we have. And finally, explore some resources that can support your organization in evaluation plans, setting your outcomes and tracking progress over time. So this is kind of what our roadmap looks like to get there. We're going to start off with some, definitions and key terms, turn to logic models and do our breakout room activity, and then think about storytelling, some of the tensions and challenges in evaluation, and then kind of hear from Adirondack Foundation towards the end to talk about resources as well. So let's kind of get started with this question. What does evaluation mean to you? So everyone can kind of grab a paper and pencil or, your phone, whatever you like. We're just going to take 1 minute and feel free to jot down, what's your kind of definition of evaluation, or what's some word association that you might have with that term. There might be some emotions that you have associated with the word evaluation, positive or negative. That's all fine. But take just a minute on your own to jot down whatever comes to mind. So as we're coming back, I've got a definition here, but I'd really love to hear from all of you. So if a couple people can take themselves off of mute, if you want to popcorn what you thought of, compare it to this working definition, or feel free to put your ideas in the chat as well.
I often say it's about measuring success, and I think that's captured in the second half of that definition about effectiveness of a project. But those are the two words I think about.
Thanks, Jen. Measuring success. I love that. Any other contributions? Or feel free to add them to the chat and I'll read them out.
Also said understanding not just success is what I put, strengths and your weaknesses.
Great. Thanks, Claudia.
Yeah,
Strengths and weaknesses. And sorry, do I hear another voice?
Yes, this is Richard Leach. I wrote that it's the process of understanding the values or merits of an organization, of a process, of a person.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So this process orientation to understanding values, merits. We've got some other great contributions in the chat about accountability, review, collecting data. best planning for next iterations of things, sort of quality and effectiveness. Excellent. So thank you all for those. As I said, this is kind of a working definition that we're using for today. Evaluation is a structured process through which we collect information, analyze the results, and make interpretations about the effectiveness of a project, program, initiative, or other effort. There are a lot of pieces to that. I've tried to sort of bold what I think are some of the important parts, but this idea, the sort of important phases of this being that collecting information, the data gathering, this process is intended to be very informed by your community, your results, your work, analyzing the results that you're collecting, and then this kind of human element that we really need to then make interpretations. Unfortunately, data are not always perfectly crystal clear for us. So there's always that interpretive effort that goes along with our data. And what we're trying to do there, the sort of end result of this, is we're making the interpretations about effectiveness, whether positive or negative, what that effectiveness size might look like of a project, program, initiative, or other effort. So why do we undergo this process? Well, we might be asking some questions that look a little like this. Did our programs accomplish what we intended? Why not? And what do we do now? Have we made a difference? How are things changing? Are they changing at all? And also this, somebody mentioned accountability earlier. How effective a partner are we to our constituents? And how could we be an even better partner? And then finally, are we making good decisions? What do we need to learn more about? So all really important questions that I'm sure you're asking in your organizations in different ways every day, and evaluation can help to inform those. I'm going to get into a couple of key definitions here, but before I do, just kind of a note. We have a whole range of folks and experiences in the Zoom room today. You might be someone who is a total evaluation novice, or maybe you're someone on the other end who has a lot of knowledge and experience. That is all welcome and needed. I'll be reviewing definitions and topics, throughout today, mainly to make sure that we're all, using common language and on common ground with one another for the conversation. If you're someone who has a lot of evaluation knowledge, definitely encourage you to think of this as an opportunity to spend time sort of reflecting on these questions and topics with a new group of colleagues and peers, and share your knowledge. And if you're newer to this work, welcome. We hope it's helpful. Hope you can dive in a little bit with us today. But just as a reminder, there's a whole range of experiences in the room, and we really appreciate that and want you to be able to share to whatever is comfortable for you. So with that said, we hear the words monitoring and evaluation, in tandem all the time. Sometimes people mix up the terms, but kind of what are the distinctions here, or what are the important things to know about? On the monitoring side, we think about this as kind of ongoing collection of information about progress, as well as the sort of shifting context around us. So the data here may include things like, the number of attendees or community members served. Could be reports or surveys that you're getting back from constituents. And the emphasis is usually on whether or not programs are kind of working or as intended. Some other related terms that you might hear on the monitoring side are things like, tracking, your data collection, assessment, measurement, those kinds of terms. And then if we think about evaluation, evaluation is really, sort of taking that next step in terms of analysis of both the quantitative and qualitative data that is collected through a whole variety of methods. So those could be things like focus groups, stakeholder interviews, monitoring sort of change over time. And the emphasis of evaluation is less on sort of, tracking progress and more on trying to understand the outcomes, the change, and the impact that you're having with community members. Evaluation can also help organizations learn and continuously improve, or kind of shift their strategic focus so that it's really reaching their goals. Related terms that you might hear on this side, the evaluation side, are more in that vein, the sort of learning or organizational learning, sort of continuous improvement is usually associated with evaluation. So, what are some of the benefits of evaluation? Kind of why do we do this process? Does anybody want to popcorn up a couple of ideas about what touched on some of them earlier, but what are the benefits of this process? Improvement. Thank you, Claudia. Great growth. Thanks, Catherine. Christina, an org must evaluate in order to grow, get better. Absolutely. These are great. When we think about evaluation, funding, Jen, absolutely. When we think about evaluation, we TPI tend to sort of put benefits across these three buckets. So you've got your accountability piece. There's that's kind of when we start thinking about transparency with our community members, our constituents, what are we doing? How well is it working? Also accountability with funders can be another element that helps to build that trust and relationship over time. There's the bucket of sort of continuous learning and adaptation in the middle. So that's generally more internal. So things like making sure that your programs are really working the way you intend them to. You're sort of seeing results. And if not, or they're not working the way you thought they might, help guide the organization to adaptation, really working towards its strategic goals that it has set out. And then the final piece is thinking about impact. So evaluation can shed a lot of light on what impact or change that we are having with our community members. And zooming in on that a little bit more, it also helps us to really craft a compelling story of your nonprofit that's focused on that impact rather than your activities and what you're doing. So you're creating a story that's really centered around results, effectiveness, and change. All right. So we've talked a little bit about, what evaluation is, why we do it, what we might kind of gain from that process, but how do we actually get started with that process? So we're going to get started with SMART goals and logic models. And I'm sure many of you are really familiar with SMART goals. So we're just going to have a quick review of kind of the acronym here. SMART standing for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So if we're going to evaluate something, then we want to have a goal in mind. We want to know kind of where it is that we're trying to go so that we can see how we are and get in making progress towards that goal. So we've got a couple of example SMART goals here just to take a look at as a group. And you'll see they kind of range from at the top, something that's more short term and relatively sort of very time bound. And then towards the bottom, something that's like longer, sort of medium term goal. But throughout, what we're looking for are things, that are specific, that are easy to understand and conceptualize, things that are measurable, that have some targets kind of embedded within them, achievable. So it should be challenging and maybe even a reach for your organization, but not not something that's really pie in the sky or that's not going to be achievable in your organization's lifespan. Relevant to your strategic goals, relevant to the work that you're doing, and time bound. So you can always extend and change those time bounds, but you want to start off with something that has some bounds on it so that you have an idea of what you're working towards. So in these examples, we will support at least 100 families to apply for SNAP benefits through food pantry outreach, this holiday season. So a specific number of people, a specific time frame, and then kind of how you're going to do it. In the second example, it's more around expanding younger audience, and then we define what younger is for this particular organization. This one is next season, so we're looking a little bit more into the future by 15%. That's our measurable target through strategies such as social media, targeted ads, partnership, etc. And then our final goal here, just as an example, is around accessibility in nature preserves. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing because you can see it, but the idea here is that this one's really stretching out further into time. So we're looking a couple years in advance, and we're setting a goal, again, sort of a measurable target. And here it's 20% more accessible trails. And then we have some ideas about the pathways and the sort of strategies that we're going to use to reach that target. So again, those can be things that you're kind of measuring and working towards over the course of a couple of years. All right. Just kind of as a temperature check here, whose organization, I'm sure all of your organizations are using goals in different ways, but are SMART goals things that you're generally working with or not? And how familiar is this process to a lot of folks? Okay, great. So let's say, we've set a SMART goal. We know what we want to do. How are we going to actually get there? What does that pathway look like? That's where logic models start to come into play. So the logic model is a roadmap that illustrates sort of your expected pathways from activity to outputs to outcomes. And there are a whole host of other kind of considerations that can be tracked, whether that's things like your goals themselves, the assumptions that you have. You can split outcomes into short, medium, long, all kinds of other ways of thinking about it. But the basic logic model format is usually just kind of boils down anyway to those three considerations: activities to outputs to outcomes. So putting this kind of a little bit more in depth, activities are really the actions, the tools, the events, the processes that your organization might use to bring about change. So in this example, we've got a food pantry offers groceries every week. That's an activity that they do. It's kind of part of their organization's day-to-day work. And that's, sort of in the activities column. Those activities hopefully lead to what we call outputs. So outputs are the direct results of those activities. So often outputs can be counted or measured with numbers. So if we kind of go along with our example here, those outputs might include things like pounds of food distributed or the number of people who are served through this weekly grocery program, things like that. And then tracing our expected pathway, we're going to come to outcomes. So outcomes, we really think about as the benefits that our community members experience. And so those can be more sort of quantitative or qualitative. And here we're thinking about, in our example with our food pantry, we might think about kind of food insecurity being alleviated during this specific amount of time. So that's not, it's the result of our activities and the outputs, but it's really what the community members are benefiting or how they're benefiting. They're experiencing that ease in food insecurity. So in general, we do the activities, we measure the outputs, and we're going to evaluate the outcomes. Life is not always quite that neat, unfortunately. So there may be, some crossover or kind of gray areas within that. But as a really general statement, if we're thinking about kind of the distinctions between these different types of different terms that are part of our logic model, that's kind of how we think about them. We're going to do activities, we're going to measure the outputs that come from those activities, and then we're going to evaluate how those make change the outcomes. Putting this into a really simple template, this is kind of what we're looking at. We've got our SMART goal at the top that's giving us our direction, that's giving us where we want to go. And then below, we've got our logic model laid out kind of left to right. So we're doing our activities, those are leading to these outputs, and then those are leading to our outcomes. So we're going to be coming back to this template in a couple of minutes. But first, let's look at an example and kind of see how this might play out. So in this example, our SMART goal is that we're going to support at least 50 caregivers to develop strong early literacy skills and high quality reading routines with their young children ages 0 to 5. So the activities that our organization might be putting on to sort of support this goal is that we're going to host monthly read-along series at 3 local libraries. And we've got, a total of 24 sessions that we want to have as our activity. We're going to distribute high quality early childhood books to families. And we're going to also develop and distribute family reading guides to go along with those books. So that's what they're getting as a take home. And then another activity that we're going to do is really administer 3 surveys to families about their reading routines and kind of their children's literacy. Those activities are going to lead to some outputs. So families are going to attend. We're going to, establish those connections and partnerships with local libraries. Families are going to receive those take-home books and the guides. And the caregivers are going to learn about kind of the importance of reading routines and all about literacy through the guides that we're providing. So if we think about how we might be tracking along as we go through this logic model, a lot of these outputs can be measured in numbers. So those might be tracking measurements such as how many families are coming to our events. Our goal was to have 24 sessions. Are we actually able to have that many sessions? We might think about counting the number of attendees just overall, how many are at each one, or we might be doing more of like how many unique families, how many people might be coming to repeat sessions versus just the overall numbers of attendees. How many books are we distributing? All of those kinds of like numbers-based things tend to be associated with our outputs. And then lastly, on our outcomes side, sorry, my computer's going to sleep over here. Okay, lastly, on our outcomes side, we have that families and children are really kind of like developing strong like routines and positive associations with attending the library, like coming to these activities. That's more of a qualitative benefit. Children and families are regularly reading books at home, high quality books at home. Caregivers are gaining efficacy and confidence about how to encourage early reading. And then children are increasing their early literacy skills. And so some of the ones that we've called out here as outcomes are phonemic awareness, letter recognition, early phonics, and vocabulary. So those may be the sort of targeted reading skills that we're really going after with this program. So if we think about how we might be trying to track some of these things too, a lot of this will hopefully be coming from our survey data that we're going to be administering a few times throughout the program. So that might be places where we can get some of this more qualitative information from caregivers filling it out, but telling us about what their children know about early literacy skills that maybe they didn't know before. What do their routines at home look like? Are they reading with their children before bed or every day, or about how often per week? How do they feel about going to the library and getting these books that we're distributing? So all of those kinds of types of information, which is going to be more of a blend of the quantitative and the qualitative, can help to inform our assessment of what the outcomes and the change look like based on this program that we've been administering. Okay, so again, this is kind of the sample logic model, but we're sort of trying to trace what we think is going to be the pathway from the stuff that we're doing to what change looks like in the community at the end. And this one, we're just going to take a quick look at. We're not going to do a whole deep example, but this is what might something look like if we try to add some more components to it. So instead of just our simple that has the 3 across, in this, we're really going to think about what's the vision or the mission of our organization, what's some community data or need that illustrates what we need to change. how have we sort of set a SMART goal to address those needs? And then maybe building in some of our assumptions, like assumptions could be anything. In our last example, it could be that we assume there are libraries who can host this type of program. We assume that we can get book donations of really high quality children's books that we can then distribute. In other types of programs, it might be that we assume we have the right kinds of partnerships on board, or that there are other sort of nonprofits and actors within the system that can help to support our work in different ways. And then the logic model going across the bottom here lays out a little bit more clearly what are some of our inputs. That might be things like, our staff time, or some of the, physical supplies and things like that, or space that we need to contribute towards our activities. We're going to list out the activities and the outputs like we did before. And then here we've separated outcomes into short, medium, and long so that we can really see this progression play out over a longer time period. So another way of thinking about it, for today, we're mostly going to stick with kind of the simple template just to sort of practice this process. We've gone through that logic model process. How does that help us with the sort of storytelling piece? Instead of kind of reporting our outputs, so we have an example here. We delivered 1,000 hours of after-school tutoring during the 23-24 school year, reaching more than 100 students. We're going to refocus that story on our impact and the outcomes that we're having. So tutoring students improved their test scores by an average of 15%, with over 75% of students meeting or exceeding grade level expectations in literacy. So instead of just reporting all the stuff that we did, we're really focusing on what effect it had on the students. We've got a couple of other impact focus examples here. In our health and wellness space, we provided free health screenings for 1,000 community members. That's great. What did those health screenings help people do? Well, if we focus on impact, our health screenings identified early signs of chronic illness in 30% of participants. 80% of those individuals took follow-up actions to improve their health based on our referrals. So there are always times where we as nonprofits are going to be, talking about the activities and the things that we did, but as much as possible, using the sort of evaluation and the impact-based lens, we can really most of the time reframe that to be more centered on our community members and what the changes and the benefits that they're experiencing are like, which ultimately is a compelling story if we're looking for we're looking for more people to kind of support our work in various ways. So we've done all of this work together today. What are some of the things that I'm not going to go through all of these, but what are some of the tensions and the challenges when we talk about evaluation? We've got a whole bunch that are listed here, but just to kind of call out a few. There are really long time horizons. Change takes time. And so evaluating that change is an investment of, time, effort, money, staff, sometimes bringing in outside evaluators or experts, and all of that can be a real challenge for nonprofits. So just acknowledging that this is, a long time process, and that nonprofits can sort of, or should be thinking about it as such, that even if you're not sort of dedicating a whole budget line towards it, just making sure that you're setting aside sort of the time and the staff capacity to be thinking about some of these issues and really tracking it over time. Another one that I'll chat about is getting candid feedback. It can be really challenging from our constituents to get them to respond to surveys, come in for interviews, give the feedback that is both or that is kind of unbiased, that is, maybe honest, that we want to get. Sometimes the people who we most need to hear from are the people who didn't benefit from the services that we were providing because of whatever barriers were in their way. And so that can be a real challenge to get to hear from them, and then understand kind of the full context of how our programs are working in the community or not working as well as we want them to. And then we want to talk about centering equity in this process as well. So we have a whole bunch of questions here that are really centered around the ideas of equity and evaluation. Whose voices are being heard? Are they representative of the full, the full community at large? Are they representative of just the community members that we're serving? And do those look the same? Who's designing and asking the questions? Do community members have a voice in setting our goals, in a voice in designing what the questions are that are being asked, so that we can really have community buy-in and have it make sense and be relevant to the folks who we're working with. Who owns and interprets the data? So if that's data that we're collecting, are there any ethical questions about data gathering? How are we protecting survey information? Is it anonymized? All of those kinds of questions, especially if we're working with vulnerable populations, that are really important. Who benefits most? So if we're thinking about, evaluating a program, are there kind of uneven benefits that might break down across socioeconomic lines or other types of differences? And what does that mean for how we're designing and running our programs? And then how do those structural and historical conditions contribute? And they might be influencing, the things that we're doing directly or indirectly, but kind of what are the historical and structural conditions in your context, in your, community? And then how are they playing out today? What are some of the barriers that you as an organization might be up against? And there are always unintended, effects and consequences that we have. And so remaining open to those, even as we're looking for all the good that our programs are doing, are there other ways that that we are sort of maybe disincentivizing things or having unintended effects that we didn't anticipate when we were kind of setting out our beautiful logic model in the beginning and thinking about all of the ways that this would play out over time. So definitely want to make sure that we're sort of talking about and raising some of these questions from the beginning to help kind of enrich the way that you're thinking about evaluation as a whole. And now I'm going to invite Jen up just for our last couple minutes to share a little bit about Adirondack Foundation's own, journey and what their process has been like. So Jen, if you don't mind sharing.
Thank you, Lacey. Just to
You.
close us out here today, wanted to share a little bit. So the foundations, Adirondack Foundations worked with TPIB again a few months ago, really to develop our capacity for how we do evaluation and share impact. We did a lot of interviews, dug through a lot of our resources, and really what we've built was we rebuilt our strong community framework, which may be familiar to some of you. We're going to share that afterwards, to include outcomes. Before it was a list of approaches. Now it includes outcomes, and it has some tools that might be helpful for folks here and not here that are doing similar work in basic needs and educational pathways and economic vitality. It's got some indicators and measures, ideas of things that you might choose to measure. As part of this process, we're looking at how to give better guidance to people that we work with, whether that's in collaboration labs and bringing people together in the safety net, or whether that's even just how we do, we're updating our grant application and follow-up reports to give a little bit more guidance for organizations. Um, so just as we're wrapping here, and thank you all so much for joining. I'll note that we're going to share some resources following this workshop. We've got, of course, the slide deck. We'll have a recording. We'll share the strong community framework that does have outcome and indicators and sort of that added materials and resources, as well as some other resources for digging a little bit further into whether that's impact storytelling or evaluation methods. And we're going to ask for your feedback. We definitely want to know from you, this is our jumping off point. What do you really want to dig into to help further your practice? Or what resources can we help connect you with? So please stay tuned in email and we'll again have a little follow-up survey. Love to hear your feedback and ideas for further connection. So from our end, thank you so much for joining. Lacey, I'll turn it back over to you to give a closing greeting as well.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Great. So thank you for joining us today. As Jen shared, this is really a jumping off point, and Adirondack Foundation is going to be eager to support and to hear your ideas about what you might want for resources and training next. I've got our email addresses listed here in case you want to get in touch with us. And Jen and I and Leslie will also be staying here on the Zoom for a few minutes after we close in just a minute. If you do want to chat with us about it or raise any questions, we're more than happy to chat. But mainly really want to thank you all for coming today and for participating. I know it's hard to not only find time in your schedules to do kind of a webinar training, but also to really jump into it. And so I appreciate that a lot. And I really hope that doing this process today and collaborating with each other has been a helpful step for you. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.